Jake, thank you so much for being on the show. I always say that I'm incredibly blessed to be able to just use this podcast to also catch up with old friends who have been in the ecosystem for a while. And it's not only like that great channel for that kind of use case, but it's also, now that we live in this world where sales has really changed, and being able to build your personal brand and evangelize, especially on LinkedIn, it's proven to be like a pretty good tool for that. So I appreciate your time.
Oh, for sure. It's great to catch up, man. It's the same. And it's also great to see what, great friends have accomplished over time too. And so just thinking back of our relationship from when we were kind of like SaaS Groms running around Dreamforce together, like trying to get into parties and hanging out and stuff like that, to like doing real things that really matter. And it's just cool to see where we have come and the things that we're doing. So I'm really stoked to be on here with you.
I have to say, I don't want to like date us here, but there's this whole new generation. I think probably two generations after us now that we're seeing emerge as
Totally.
folks within SaaS and go to market specific, right? That are really excited and have been evangelizing kind of what we were doing years ago. And I remember when we were doing that, there really, at least in the startup ecosystem, there weren't too many folks doing that. I know like our buddy Aaron Ross and of course Jason Lemkin's been at it for a while. And so there were, a small group of folks who were doing that, but now it's just, social selling or influencer within B2B is really sort of exploded. And it's very exciting to see it now.
I was out of thought to that. Like I was thinking about it today actually, because Rev just released, I think they're like kind of up and coming content creators in revenue. And it was so cool to see, because I remember being considered one of those like up and coming content creators. And if you remember Gabe Villamizar, right? Like he and I were always scheming like, what kind of content we create, or like what party do we need to go to, or like who do we need to meet, or who do we need to get on our podcast? We're just like scheming to like get our voice, but also like learn from the greats. And to see now like in a position where I feel like I'm dated, but like to see the new up and coming generation of like sellers doing it, like it pumped me up to think like, okay, what do I need to do to wrap my arms around them to help elevate their voices? Because they're already at a place where they know things that I don't know yet, or I need to learn because I might still be stuck in certain ways. So it's cool to see that like it continues on, and we've got to like wrap our arms around them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to see that you see teenagers or younger generations growing up on social media, TikTok, right? Or what is the other one? Snapchat, these platforms, and they grow up and learn and consume content in ways that we've never even fathomed, right? And I think in the same way, this generation of folks that you're referring to are doing that on LinkedIn, right? I mean, just LinkedIn is just, it's really, really emerged in this incredible way. So kudos to what you're saying, and, and to the Rev Room folks, that's super cool to see that. I wanted to ask you, you work now with a ton of, different organizations, helping them get their go-to-market and revenue rocking and rolling. If you were to look at, let's say, some challenges, say top 3 challenges for sales leaders right now in 2024, as we've kind of been going through what we've been going through in SaaS over the last couple of years, whether that's finally the market kind of leveling out, or maybe just dynamics changing in how we do sales, marketing, and overall go to market, or maybe even at a higher level, how we build businesses or organizations these days. Maybe it's just evolving in a really fast way. But if you were to highlight some of the stuff that you're looking at when you work with sales leaders now in 2024, what are those things, those 3 sort of challenges, and what advice would you give sales leaders out there who might be running into that around mitigating these issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give you probably like one like high level strategic one that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and then probably like more 2 tactical ones. But at the high level, a founder needs to be thinking about, a C-level, CEO needs to be thinking about the new approach to go to market in general. And what I mean by that is like, as a CEO, you can no longer be hands off in the sense of saying, okay, this is ownership of the CRO or the CMO or the CSO. It's like one individual kind of sales or revenue leader, and expect them to kind of run with it. And you can stay back and maybe focus more on strategy and fundraising. What today's go-to-market function means is that the founder, the CEO, has to be the director. It's more data-driven than it's ever been, and it requires a level of orchestration that we haven't really seen before. And so what this means is that the CEO has to like understand the vision and the direction of where go-to-market needs to be, and then align that orchestration across all of the revenue functions. So aligning from product to the CMO, to the CRO, to customer success, and make sure that there is an orchestrated effort on how you're going to market, and that you're thinking through the buyer journey from beginning to end, and that you're close to the customer and you understand what they're needing, and that you're constantly having an iteration of communication with the customer, and you're not pulling yourself away from that engagement. Like, that is probably more critical today than I've ever seen it be. And it can't be handed off. It needs to be orchestrated. So that's one. Two, from like, I guess more tactical, but and also strategic, is like the days of like growing at all costs. I know this is like tired and it's been said. I'm not saying anything you haven't heard. Like, that's over, right? We have to be thinking about efficiency in a way that we've never thought through it before. And the reason for that is like, we like, access to capital is not what it used to be. And valuations are nowhere near where they used to be. And, our job as founders and business owners is ultimately, at the end of the day, to protect as much of our capital and valuation for the value of the business that we're building and for the people that we're building it with. And so for every dollar you sell is a dollar less you have to raise, and that's a good thing. And what you're really needing to figure out is, what does it cost me, every time I sell that dollar? And so operational efficiency, unit economics, really thinking about your business from a top down and a bottoms up view, and understanding like what every dollar puts out, and then focusing on how to drive little efficiencies along the way. That, I think, is the second really tactical piece. And then the third piece, what I'd say is, start figuring out other ways to go to market with outside of just your direct sales organization, right? Expand, because you're seeing more companies getting eaten up and bought up by larger companies, right? Like, I think there's still going to be a lot of acquisitions this year. And the biggest thing I think we can do to grow is collaborating with our partners in the space, collaborating with like our adjacent potential partners, and going to market with community, whether it's like leveraging our organizational connections, leveraging our partners' connections, leveraging channel as a way to market. We have to be thinking beyond just direct sales as a motion.
That really resonates pretty deeply from a couple different areas. However, the thing that you said last around partnerships and new channels and then leveraging connections just stands out because of a couple of things. I just did a podcast interview with, I don't know if you know Ryan O'Hara, who was over at Lead IQ for a while. Yeah. Shout out to Ryan. What he's doing right now with Pitchfire. I mean, that's pretty freaking cool, right? Like, just really changing the way that we think about prospecting, right? So for the folks out there with Pitchfire, you could just go ahead and Google it. Google Ryan O'Hara, and you can check it out. But basically, what you can do as a prospect is take meetings that based on being approached by salespeople, and you can get paid to be able to take that meeting, right? Like, who would have ever thought about that, right? Like, it reminds me of the eBay days, right? Where, when that started to happen, you were like, holy shit, like, I could sell stuff that's in my garage, right? Like, and make some money. And so, I told Ryan that the last time we were chatting, because it really does sort of hit me in that same way that eBay did. And then there's tools out there like High Five, Ryan and Brandon over there, what
Yeah.
they're doing. That's super cool. And I know they're going to be releasing some pretty cool stuff coming up in the next couple months. So just being able to leverage your network, I think they're calling it go to network
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
as a sort of a theme there. So, being able to understand new channels and think out of the box. I don't think that's new, but I think the way we can do that now certainly stands out pretty heavily. Jake, I've been hearing a lot about committee buying, and I'm sort of on the fence around this concept because, like, as a salesperson, and you carried a bag for a long time, you were a rock
Yeah.
star there. Like, for me as a salesperson, you should be able to understand all the stakeholders, who's involved in the purchasing decision. And that's always been the case, right? For as long
Mhm.
as I could remember, the idea of not doing that is just not, for me, not being a sound salesperson. However, what folks have been talking about, I would say, over the last 2 years is like everything is committee buying. And of course, because you have to fit into like tighter budgets, it's even more important. From your perspective, and given that we are now in this remote experience, how do you effectively understand who that buying committee is or who's influencing these deals, and then being able to kind of remotely be able to get in contact with those folks or influence them in the right way?
Yeah. And when you say like you're kind of on the fence, what part of it are you on the fence? Like what, like where are you struggling with the notion, or kind of curious to just better understand it?
Yeah, I'm on the fence with the idea that it's a new concept. Like, for me, that's always been the case,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
It's but people are talking about it as this trend now. I've seen, tons of influencers who I won't, say their names because I don't want them to think I'm speaking negatively, but they're speaking to it. It's like, oh, as this crazy thing, right? But again, for me, it's part of sound selling, period.
Look, like kind of just how we talked about at the beginning of this. Like we've been doing this for a minute. Nothing that we're hearing now or saying now is anything that wasn't being said or heard back then. I think the things that we are realizing now is the need for the operational rigor, or like saleswomanship around how you do it, is more important than it's ever been. Because I'll tell you, I think back then I was able to mess up on a deal and maybe do everything wrong, and still sometimes things would fall in my lap. Now, I think the challenge that sellers are up against is you don't have a lot of room for error anymore. And so the importance is like the sound sales, like motions and processes and methodologies that have always been there. It's not that they're new, it's that you have to be really good at them, better than we've ever had to be. And that's because there's so much noise out there. Going back to like the concept of go to network, one of the reasons why that works is because there's so much noise out there. There's so many people who have such like relevant, interesting, like valid content out there. It's hard for our customers, our buyers, to make sense of it in like this ocean of like content chaos. But conversations are what sell, and conversations with their peers that they trust, who refer them, are what drive like confidence in a decision that they're going to make. So using your network to refer you into a conversation where trust is already built, that's why it works. Same concept here. That noise is so loud that you have to break through it, and part of that is that you've got to get to all the decision makers involved in this process. And I think the one thing that's changed, like that, the Challenger data taught us, is that perhaps more people are getting involved, right? Like it started with 6.4, then it went to 7.2, and then 7.8. And I think the last time I heard a number was like in the 8s. But the reality is, like, decisions aren't made like vertically like they used to be. They're made a lot more laterally, and budgets are being pulled from cross-functional peers. And we're having to come together to make these decisions on how like our go-to-market motions or our organizational motions are overlapping each other. And so we just have to come to these consensus decisions more than we've ever had to. And so sellers have to get better at that, and understanding, like, if you're not understanding how you're impacting each individual decision maker, how the decision influences them personally, and they're, them internally in their role, then you're leaving yourself for exposure on the deal.
Yeah. For a seller who's listening to this episode and they're going, all right, Jake, all right, George, like I get the concept, but how do I do it? I'm sitting in my room in Atlanta, Georgia, for example, right? And I'm not in front of these folks. I'm not at a networking event with them. I'm more remote than ever before. It was a little easier when everything, for the most part, was, or a good portion of interactions were in person and there was more of an ecosystem. But I'm this remote seller. How do I do that if I'm just speaking to, let's say, one individual, or maybe I've gotten on the phone with one other, right? Let's just say I'm talking to one or two people.
Well, I first want to disrupt that notion that like people aren't getting together anymore. Because like, yes, I think the pandemic changed the way we'll work forever. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of companies that are getting back into the office or hybrid. And I will tell you, as a seller who's kind of come up in your career during this pandemic era, I will bank on the fact that if you go and ask your direct manager if you can spend on travel to close a meaningful deal to get in front of your customer who is in an office or is attending an event, I'll be shocked at any leader who would tell you no. I met a lot of customers in places that was never their office, but I knew they were going to be attending a conference, and so I just got on a plane and I went. Or I knew that they were going to be, going to this like whatever regional conference, and so I went. Or I knew they worked at there are people that I knew they worked at certain places. When I was in medical device, I would just show up, and I would be there, and I'd be present. I'd like connect with people, and that's okay. So trying to work in person is not a bad thing. Let me get away from that for a second. To like do it in the way now from like in this digital world, in the Zoom world, as long as like the first thing you need to focus on is figuring out who your champion is. And if you found a champion that you're working with that wants to solve this problem, I promise you, they have no desire to guard you from talking to their peers who are going to help them get this problem solved. So you need to have the courage to ask them, who else is involved in this project? Who else is this like this business initiative or this project or this problem that's being experienced impacting, and how are they involved in the decision-making process, and will they give you access? If they're a true champion who has a real problem that you've identified that really needs to be solved, they will not guard you. And if they're guarding you, it's because they don't trust you, and that's another problem you've got to figure out.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for that. So for the reps out there listening, don't be scared to ask management if you can actually travel to go and see a prospect, whether that's in their office location or region or at an event that they might be at. Really get to hustling, folks, a little there, and of course, really being able to select your champions and work with them. And to Jake's point, if they're not giving you access to these other folks, there's something there that you got to work through. There's a trust issue or something that you got to uncover. So thank you so much for that, Jake. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about LinkedIn and just using social, because to your point early on, like you and Gabe, you guys were like social selling rock stars, right? Like before it was a thing. And so I remember that. Now, fast forwarding to 2024, what are some of the ways that we can effectively use LinkedIn to be able to just help sales cycles move forward, prospect, and really ultimately get deals done?
Shoot, dude. Well, I'll say what my legacy is being able to speak at the very first Sales Navigator conference ever. It's like, that's how old I am. But the truth is, like, one thing hasn't changed. And then I think there's one thing that's kind of advanced. One, the way that LinkedIn worked back then is still the way it works now, but people are just terrible at it. And that's, LinkedIn is not meant for you to connect and spam. It like, nobody wants spam in their inbox. We've got email for that, and now LinkedIn's become worse at it, right? So the way it worked back then, the way it's working now is that if you're adding value to my network, to me, to my community, then you've got my attention. So if you want to connect with me, start adding value by looking at like the content that I'm sharing. add commentary to it, reshare my content, ask questions to drive engagement on the threads, like become part of my community on LinkedIn. And then when we have some familiarity there and it's clear to me that like we're engaging, I think to make a soft ask or to move those conversations to an inbox is a very natural flow. But for you to just come in hot and pitch me, like that never worked. It's never going to work. And it's only like noisier than it was before. So just give that up. The second piece is like building your thought leadership. I think we debated it back then. It's even more important now than it ever was, right? People want to know who they're doing business with, and they want to trust your credibility and your clout behind like who you are and what you have to say. It doesn't mean creating bogus content and trying to like create, like a thought leadership. It just means get your voice out there, share content, and let people know what's in your mind, and let your buyers know that you understand their industry, their business, their company as well, if not better than they do, and they will come to you.
Awesome. I've heard that LinkedIn is kind of this new PR machine as well, right? For your personal brand. And of course, you can leverage it for your company. If you were to think about being a better coach, right? I was chatting with my buddy earlier today about the difference between managers and coaches, and how, like a great manager should be a great coach, right? But for whatever reason, there are quite a few, that's not always the case. Anything that comes to mind for the sales leaders listening to this episode that you can kind of point out to say, if you do this one thing, I know it's generally more than that, but if you had to identify one actionable thing they can do to better or up level their coaching, what would that be?
I wish it was that simple, but okay, I'll say one thing first. A manager cares about their paycheck and their paycheck only. A coach cares about the well-being and the self-actualization of the people on their team and their ability to achieve at the expense sometimes of their own paycheck, but because they want to create an environment that creates psychological safety and opportunity for growth and development on their team, right? And so if there's one thing I can tell you as a leader, if you're trying to figure out if you're a coach or a manager, or if you're trying to assess if you have a coach or a manager and you want that coach, it's someone who spends the time on helping you become a better version of yourself, and they actually give a shit, right? If you're worried about your commission check and that translates into you smashing the more button every time you talk to your reps in one-on-ones, asking about the numbers every single day, like, do you think your reps actually want to join one-on-ones with you if that's the experience that they have? Do you think they wake up in the morning stoked to go work for you because you're just going to hound them and remind them of where they fail? Or are you putting in the effort to help them be better, to coach them on the areas where like they can grow and to give them opportunities? Like that's the difference.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just because we've said it before, but it baffles me how folks still don't get it. And I think that in my experience, just with human nature in general, when things are tough, right, and maybe the economy is not what it usually is when it's in a bull market and those sort of things, I think the coaching tends to go out the door. And then, of course, you have this self-fulfilling prophecy almost, right? Where you get scared, you stop the coaching, you kind of cover your heart and your emotions because you're in a fear mode sort of state of being. And then reps, sales, all these things sort of go sideways and you wonder why, right? Yeah, I'm not saying that the macro environment doesn't have an effect in these other variables, but if your team is not feeling supported, motivated, inspired, you're not going to get there either way, right? So I really appreciate you speaking to that. I wanted to ask you one last question. Thank you again so much for being on the show. But if you, and I think there's some overlap here, if you had to think about what the top sales reps are doing in 2024 to really stand out from the noise, you've said it already here today, bits and pieces of it, but if you had kind of just one sort of a statement or so, or a little, maybe some short advice on giving folks kind of those things to focus on to be a top seller, what would those things be?
Okay. I want to go back and kind of incorporate something from the last question into part of my answer and then like expand on it. But the first thing is like you were talking about the fear mindset, right? I'll tell you as a seller, as a leader, at anyone in revenue, in any type of leadership role or anything in life, a fear-led mindset will never lead you to success ever. So if you find yourself living in a state of fear and that influences the decisions that you're making, you need to pause and you need to separate the things that you can control and that you can't control and move forward, right? Now, like top performing sales reps, I think have come to realize that. And as part of that, they separate their self-worth from their self-value, like their self-worth from their self-esteem. Like sales is hard. It's a grind. You get knocked down every single day. You get punched in the teeth. You get told that like, like where have you failed in life to end up with a job like this? Like you're hearing it all. And if you can learn to separate your self-esteem on the way you feel some days when you're getting kicked and you lose that deal from your self-worth, and you know what you're good at and that maintains and always consistent, then you can pick yourself back up and you can always like perform. So that's a really important mindset. And I think to get like tactical in the things you can do, I think again, it's consistent with the way it's always been. Focus on understanding how you can solve the most meaningful problems for your customers by understanding their industry, their business, their problem just as much, if not better than they do. And it will shine, like it will just like naturally be part of every engagement conversation that you have. If you are focused on asking the right questions to solve the right problems, then I think you will succeed in your career and do extremely well. So be curious. Be curious.
Be curious, folks. Thank you so much, Jake. I really appreciate it, brother. I wanted to give you a high five. I'm like, hell yeah, man.
Oh.
Awesome. Well, if folks wanted to connect with you on social or maybe, you know, ping you for some advice or maybe learn about how you help organizations with their go-to-market and revenue challenges and ultimately hit success, what are the best channels or URLs to reach you?
Yeah, well, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. You can search me, Jake Reni. Check out our website, revenue-reimagined.com, if you want to learn more about what we do and the type of go-to-market consulting and coaching that we offer. And otherwise, like I'm always here to answer questions and help out. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and you have your own podcast as well as an organization, Revenue Reimagined, which is awesome. So definitely check that out, folks. Jake, big hug, brother. I hope to see you maybe in Colombia. Maybe we can hang out at some point, right?
Yeah, I need to go back to Parque Tayrona, and just the coastline. That was the most beautiful beach I've ever seen in my life.
I got to write that one down. Awesome. All right, brother. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much.
Later.